Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I want to invite you once again to the latest episode of the NetOps Expert. And we are very excited to be joined today by Chris Grundemann. Chris used to be an analyst with the GigaOM Corporation and is now doing a lot of exciting stuff in the world of networks and automation. Chris, can you introduce yourself? Tell the listeners a little bit about your career and what you've been working on lately.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as you said, my name's Chris Grundemann. I'm a network engineer by trade. I started working on my first wireless internet service provider around the turn of the century. And that one was interesting. We had no idea what we were doing, as is often the case early on. And we were providing fixed wireless broadband to unserved areas of Colorado, right? Because at that time, cable internet was just getting started. It was mostly in the cities. DSL was the same thing. If you were very far out of the city at all, you couldn't get any internet. So people were either installing these huge, like 6 to 8 foot, like HughesNet dishes, or doing something like what we were doing, which was basically pulling a T1 into somebody's house on the highest hill and then putting some antennas in and doing fixed broadband Wi-Fi essentially to all the other folks in that neighborhood. And we built our own routers, which sounds cooler than it was. We wrote a bunch of Perl scripts to install static routes and NAT rules into IP tables on Linux boxes.
Wow.
And anyway, that was kind of my birth by fire into the ISP world, and then worked at kind of subsequently larger and larger ISPs, and then pivoted into the data center space and got more involved in cybersecurity and some of the other sides of IT in the enterprise world. And then, as you said, then went kind of out on my own a few years ago, and have been doing a lot of kind of advisory and analyst services, helped GigaOM build their advisory practice around networking and cybersecurity. And then since then, have started the Network Automation Forum with my partner, Scott Robon. And we've got an event series called AutoCon that we've done 2, and the third one's coming up in November. And then I've also got a little software development shop that I work on with my partner, Matt Griswold. Doing some automation stuff.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, I just spoke with Ben Book. He was on the NetOps Expert this week, and I'm speaking to Andrew Green tomorrow as well. So awesome. Really great crew over there. Actually, I was talking to Howard on the Disruptive Technologies podcast. He had me on, I think, last week or the week before. Really fun guy, and we really could have nerded out for many, many hours around networking.
Sure. Yeah.
So. All right, Chris, that's really exciting. You and I met maybe 5 years ago when you did one of the GigaOM radars for network monitoring, network observability. And I'm really glad that we've been in touch ever since. But listen, tell our listeners more about the Network Automation Forum and AutoCon. How did it start? Why did it start? And what's it doing for some of the customers out there?
Sure. Yeah. So, the idea behind the Network Automation Forum was kind of twofold. One, so Scott and I started talking about why have we been talking about network automation for, call it 15 years, and in some cases longer, right? I mean, as I said, the very first network I built with scripts. Now that was a little bit odd because we didn't have the money to buy routers and things, but service providers have been doing some kind of automation, whether it's Tickle or expect scripts or whatever, screen scraping, all kinds of stuff for as long as we've been building networks. The enterprise space, not as much. I think around 2012, I guess it was, when OpenFlow kind of hit the street, so to speak, hit the wire. People got really excited about this idea of SDN. I was a little skeptical. I was already getting to maybe my curmudgeon-y stage, I guess, of having done networking for 10 years. I was like, I don't know. And I looked into it. I was working at Cable Labs at the time, which was an R&D kind of think tank for the cable industry. And so I got to do some really deep research into SDN and what all this meant. And the conclusion I came to personally was what people are really excited about isn't so much separation of control plane and forwarding plane. They're really excited about automating their network, like taking control, moving it from going box by box, device by device, CLI by CLI, to actually being able to look at the network as a system and say, hey, go do this thing, go move these packets in this way, and have it just kind of happen. Right. And I think I was right, because now 10 years later, SDN and OpenFlow have kind of fallen away, and we're back to talking about how do we actually improve network operations. But not very many people have actually done it. And so Scott Robon and I got talking, and we said, well, why is that? And, we had some ideas, obviously, but we wanted to kind of open that up and say, let's all come together and talk about this. And so we created the Network Automation Forum as call it a watering hole, right? For folks who are excited about network automation to come together and talk. And in that, then created the AutoCon event series. So We did the first one, kind of a crash course. I think we spent like 4 or 5 months getting ready and kind of white knuckling it and saying, I don't know if anybody's going to show up. I don't know if sponsors are going to show up. I don't know if attendees or speakers are going to show up. It came off. We obviously hit a nerve. I mean, just right place, right time. People do want to talk about this. They want to move network automation forward. So we had like 345 people show up in Denver. That was awesome. And then we just did it again in Amsterdam. We maxed out, filled the Hilton, couldn't fit any more folks in there. And now we're going to have the third one again in Denver the week of November 18th. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, looking forward to that. Well, listen, that brings up a good point. It's so funny when you were telling that, and you and I have had conversations about this as well. It sounds like a mental health support group. Like, get all, why aren't we? Yeah. And I want to ask you that question. Why? Before you answer, I'm going to tell you why I think, and it's probably outdated, but why hasn't automation taken? Now, I haven't run data centers in like 15 years, but when I did, automation is like stealing my job, right? Yeah, I got all these racks, I got all these devices. That's my job security. If I need to go one by one, I need to go one by one. And if you're going to automate it, that's scary as hell to me as an engineer. Why do you think it hasn't taken off?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I think there are certainly, or at least there have been, some like network engineering jobs that weren't quite full-time jobs, but no one understood the network enough to realize that, except for maybe the network engineer who was in this kind of cushy spot. So I think there's probably a little bit of that, right? Like this company doesn't really need a full-time network engineer. And if we get automation, then they definitely don't need me. Like what to do? I think in most cases, that's not the case though. I think most places, there's not enough network engineering skill to go around. We're really having the opposite problem, right? Where we just can't hire people. I think a whole generation or maybe a couple generations of kids got really excited about software development. And I guess it wasn't AI until very recently, but apps and web and that kind of stuff. And so I think we've had kind of a dearth of folks coming into infrastructure jobs. And whether that's networking or cybersecurity or storage, I think these areas of kind of the fundamental infrastructure of IT have been a little bit underserved as far as new folks coming into the field. And so in all cases, we're a little strapped. And then network engineering is probably the furthest behind on automation. So we really need it. But so then why aren't we doing it, right? And I think there's a couple reasons. I think one, actually, that dearth of talent means that most network engineers are actually super, super busy all the time, mostly chasing things around, chasing tickets, putting out fires, whatever it might be. And so then even if they were to get executive buy-in and say, hey, go automate the network, who's actually going to do it and when are they going to do it? Maybe if you don't want to sleep, you can get it done. And companies kind of seem to want to like get network automation without spending any money. That's tough because again, it's a whole different skill set, right? You need developers, you need systems engineers, and you need network engineers working together to make this all happen. So that's probably part of it too, which is just an understanding of what it takes to actually automate a network and why that's a good investment. I think that's a big part of this. The business case is a big part of it. Back to the individuals though, I think there's this other piece, which is less about job security and more about identity, right? I remember when I got my JNCIE, it felt really meaningful to me personally, right? It was this huge achievement in my life. But what was that really a test of? That was a test of how fast I can work the CLI. And so if your identity is tied up in your CCIE or CCNP or whatever it might be, and the way you judge your skill is how fast you can work in the CLI, then when somebody comes along and says, you don't need the CLI anymore, or at least you don't need to use it all every day, or your speed in the CLI doesn't matter, that's actually a hit to your identity of how you value yourself as a person and as a worker, as a colleague. And I think that's a big scary thing as well.
Well, it's funny you say that because a good friend of mine just retired, but he was a network engineer with a large financial services company here on the East Coast, and he did more scripting than he did logging into the CLI of a router or switch or something. And I couldn't script when I was running data centers. I mean, I had a hard enough time remembering, everything I could do in the CLI, and then maybe moving to Junos and then having to learn that language, right? So, we're also hearing in the field, shortage of, I don't know if you're hearing it too, a shortage of skilled, IT workers. And if that's the case, I would think automation has to be something that needs to be adopted. I mean, if we're lacking skilled workers and people are just running around chasing tickets and not working on more innovative projects, then automation sounds like the answer to alleviate some of that.
I think so. Absolutely. And I think it also pays to think about automation kind of more holistically. It is one thing to write a script that pushes configs out, and that's great, and that does move you forward. I think when we look at kind of automation more holistically, we're looking at this kind of full cycle, right? This, whether it's that DevOps kind of circle or snake or however you want to look at it, but this is not just configuration. It's also reading state from the network as well. And so if you can kind of move that management plane off of those devices into this platform where anyone, an executive, a cybersecurity staffer, a storage person, a developer can look in and see what's going on in the network through graphs and tables and things, and then also potentially make changes where needed without having to raise that ticket at all, right? The developers can just self-serve and say, oh, actually, when I turn up a VM over here, I want to make sure that VLAN actually gets plumbed through the network and have that just kind of happen automatically. Maybe there's an approval process, maybe not, depends on your risk tolerance. But definitely, I think this is absolutely required for the scale of networks and just IT infrastructure in general that we have today. And so figuring out how to get from here to that point where we've all kind of automated our networks and can really look at things more strategically. That path is not worn very well yet, but I think we're all, many of us are on it, and we need to find our way there.
Let me ask you this, because you and I have talked about this before. I believe so, but everything I talk about now is the lack of visibility that many network operations teams have because they've moved all their stuff out of the data center into someone else's. If I still don't have a lot of visibility in the entire hop by hop network path that my users are using because they're hybrid, they're using SaaS, they're using cloud, how would I utilize network automation in that scenario where I'm still just trying to gain visibility of how my users use the public network?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple really interesting points there that are really important to kind of network automation and just network operations in general going forward. One is we are working in this new paradigm in most cases, especially in almost any enterprise, any business. Service providers may have it a little bit different because, their infrastructure is a little bit more core to their business. But in general, we're all working on networks that we don't own anymore, right? Part of your network is the internet. Part of your network is Google or Amazon or Microsoft's cloud or Dropbox's cloud or, whatever it might be. So I think that's a really important question is like, how do we actually understand networks in today's world where most of the, we want the traffic to be under control, but we don't control the underlying infrastructure at all. Mm-hmm. And definitely I think automation is a big piece of that and being able to tie those things together. As far as the observability piece, like I said, I think, that's definitely, half of that full circle as far as, being able to push configs and then pull stuff back. It's also a really good place to start with automation. In most cases, read-only show commands and scripting that out is a really, really low risk, easy way to kind of dip your toes into automation. It's a great place to start. Now getting like sophisticated as far as like really understanding kind of application performance across the network is a little bit more. But things like, hey, we just turned up these two VMs and they can't talk to each other. What's going on? Well, what you can do is think through the steps that you would take on the command line or in the, interface to AWS or, wherever you would go to kind of trace this path out and figure out what's going on. Take that set of commands and turn it into a script. And then whenever you have this connectivity issue, run the script, and give it your A and Z endpoints and let it go out and figure out and come back to you and tell you what the problem is instead of you going, spending an hour or two digging through all these devices, just, have a script do that for you. That's a really, really good place to start with automation. And I think it's really important that folks know that, again, it's not just configuration pushes. It's not just read write. You can get into this in a read only way and kind of start figuring out how this works, play with Python, play with Ansible, whatever it might be for you.
Tell me a little bit more about some of the use cases that were talked about by the attendees and the presenters at the Amsterdam show.
Yeah, great question. So we had 14 talks and the 2 keynotes, and almost all of those are success stories.
Good.
So kind of ran the gamut, right? We had a gentleman from Colt come talk about how they've kind of built an automation factory, right? Which was a lot of more about kind of the HR side of this almost, right? How do you put this team together? How do you get folks working together in a way that can kind of create automation as a normal part of their business? And then, everything from folks who are just getting started to folks who have really gone crazy with automation. We had some really good stories around failures that people have had, mistakes they've made along the way. And again, yeah, same, as far as use cases, right? I mean, service provider, both cloud service provider as well as internet service provider. We had some MSPs come and talk. And then enterprise space as well. And we also had some cool talks from the research and education network side of things, which is really cool. They've done some neat stuff in some of those spaces as well. We actually had a workshop from the folks at SURF, it's SURF, and they have actually built and open sourced an orchestration tool, which again, kind of talking about that next level of automation. Orchestration is that piece that ties everything together. And we had a 1-day workshop on the orchestrator tool, which they of course use in the research and education networks, but I think is totally applicable to enterprise and service provider networks as well. So kind of all over the place as far as use cases. And that's what we're trying to do. So far, we really want this to be kind of a big tent approach at AutoCon, meaning, we've got professional service providers, we've got network engineers, network architects, software developers, hardware vendors, software vendors, right? Kind of the whole gamut of everybody, and then across all the different fields, right? So whatever the industry is, whether it's enterprise or service provider or education, kind of have everybody talk. And so we get a really good mix of talks, I think, that kind of cover all those bases. So there may be some places where people are zoning out, but there's always something to kind of zone back in for. And like I said, a lot of it is around kind of how and where to get started. And those kind of initial use cases of like, how did I get buy-in from my company? How did I get funding? We found that most of the challenges to automation are not technical, right? That stuff can be solved pretty easily. I mean, there are challenges there, right? I mean, writing this code and doing these things is not easy necessarily, but it's more simple than getting the funding and getting the staffing and getting the approval to move forward. Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought about that. I was going to think the entire show was about, oh my God, can you send me that script? I don't know how to write that. Or how did you do this? Can I borrow, can I use your script and edit it? But I didn't think about, getting past the roadblocks that could be procurement or other business type of roadblocks to get funding to do something like this. That's really exciting. Listen, I got one more question for you, and then I'm going to let you plug whatever you want because you're doing so many good things for so many network personas out there today and teams. Where is the delineation line between where automation stops and AI begins? So, I know, and it's not like anyone is adopting AI today to run their network operations, and who knows where we're going to be in some years. But I suspect in many years that I'm going to be able to come into an operations center and say, hey, network robot, where should I focus my attention today? And it's going to say, well, there seem to be a lot of spikes in utilization in the Seattle area. I would start there. So where does automation stop and AI pick up?
Yeah, I think it's a spectrum, right? And again, this comes, there's some debates we can avoid here, which is like, what is AI and how do we define AI? I think in general, AI is automation at some level, right? I mean, this is handing over some control to some machines, right? And again, one of the things that came out of AutoCon 0 is this distinction between automation and orchestration, which is, automation is basically delegating a task to a bot. Orchestration is delegating a whole project or a whole workflow to a bot, right? So orchestration is kind of automation of automation. Mm-hmm. And then, AI can fit into either one of those places. Actually, at AutoCon 1 in Amsterdam, a guy, Olasapu Okunaya, I'm sure I'm devastating his name, but he presented a really cool project that he had done where he basically built a ChatGPT interface so that he could feed in variables, and then ChatGPT would create a Terraform playbook and spit that back to him. And when he received that, then he executed the Terraform playbook on the network. Mm-hmm. And so he had this really interesting thing where he kind of just gave the variables into ChatGPT and then magic happened, right? Mm-hmm. So there are people playing with this today. There's another guy who works at Cisco, John Capobianco, I think, who's doing some really interesting stuff with AI, just by kind of testing the boundaries of what you can do with ChatGPT today and what you can do with kind of these text-based interfaces. So I definitely think that's going to be rolled in at some point, but I do think it's a spectrum. I think that, the automation we're doing today is in some ways artificial intelligence, right? I mean, you're using intelligence artificially, you're using a machine to do some of the work you could have done. Where it crosses that line, I don't even know exactly, right? When it goes from just being automation to being AI. But I do think these, potentially chat or voice-based interfaces will be really interesting. But more than that, I think, as you pointed out, right, that analysis on the back end of really understanding, hey, there's something just changed in the network. This root cause analysis, I think, could be really, really exciting, right? So you don't get that cascade of alarms of like, hey, every switch is down. Well, no, what actually happened is, this SNMP port got blocked here. So doing some of that stuff would be really, really interesting. I think we're on the verge. People are just starting to play with it. We haven't had many success stories from actually deploying AI in a real network to come back and bring to the conference yet. But definitely people are talking about it in the hallway sessions, getting drinks at night and things like that. So it's definitely top of mind and it's coming. But exactly what form it'll take and how it'll show up is interesting still.
Yeah. We could save this for another episode, but I recently spoke to Greg Farrow, right,
Yeah.
from Packet Pushers. He brought up some amazing things and 1,000 acronyms that went right over my head. But he's talking about around the hype of AI, and is the network infrastructure going to be able to support AI workloads? InfiniBand versus Ethernet,
Right.
and and the fact that if AI is going to notice packet loss, can it fix it in the nanoseconds it could take, say for a financial app or something? We're talking nanoseconds of networking now. How's it going to notice something and then fix it so quickly that it doesn't, damper the performance of that network? It's a lot of good conversations.
For sure. Well, and that is with this really interesting dynamic of networks for AI and AI for networks, and where those two things intercede is a really interesting spot today too, for sure.
Yeah, they look different right now, don't they? I can't even imagine, the compute power and the networking power designed for what we're going to see AI do in the next 10 years, and then what it does for customer networks.
Yeah.
Chris, this was a good time. I enjoy seeing you, and I'm really, really excited about your success and what you're doing in the automation space to bring that topic back up to the forefront. You got a lot going on. Is there anything you want to plug and let our listeners know around the forum and AutoCon?
Sure, yeah. Networkautomation.forum is the place to find all the information. We've got a Slack channel that's pretty active. So if you want to get in on the Slack channel, that's where you get kind of the insider information and get to have some of these conversations as well. AutoCon 2, which is our third event because we indexed to 0, of course, is coming up in Denver the week of November 18th. We just announced the venue, but tickets aren't on sale or anything yet, so still have time to kind of plan for that. And then some other things I'm doing. Fullcontrol.com is some automation around interconnection and BGP specifically, kind of some niche use cases there if that's something that's interesting to you. And then also oix.org is standards around interconnection, which I find really interesting. Not really automation related, but network related, and kind of how the internet works. And some neat stuff there as well.
Yeah, you got a lot going on. And listen, I would advise anyone out there listening, take a look at what's happening in November in Denver when it comes to AutoCon. I'm going to try to make it out there, like 99.99% sure I can get out there for that. I'm really excited about that. So look me up, look Chris up. Chris, it was great seeing you again. I really enjoy everything that you're doing and everything you're posting and what you're doing to help our networking customers out there. So once again, thanks for being on the NetOps Expert. I want to invite everyone to have a great rest of your week and look forward to seeing you on the next NetOps Expert.